Hey, welcome to the Good Squad. You're in the squad room right now, and I am excited to give you part two of my myth crushers. Let's get started. All right, let's hit the first one. Most workplace violence is committed by individuals with criminal records. Oh, that's actually a good one. And I think that's one that a lot of people can kind of feel like, well, they can kind of swing both ways on that one, because it does seem like a lot of these stories, a lot of these violent incidents that occur, they're able to connect them to prior activity, prior criminal history, etc. However, the U.S. Secret Service's National Threat Assessment Center has conducted several studies on this, looking at targeted violence, and majority of perpetrators had no prior criminal history. The majority had no prior criminal history. They conducted a report, or I should say, they put together a report, Mass Attacks in Public Spaces, and found that less than 1/3 of workplace attackers had prior criminal histories. So that's actually a very noteworthy thing. Now, they could have other concerning behaviors from the past that are leading us on a pathway to believe they could become violent. So it's important we do keep that in mind as well. But when it comes to just the pure question of do they have a criminal history, it's definitely not the majority in these cases. And as mentioned, it's probably somewhere around 1/3 or so. So kind of keep that in mind as well. Next myth. Threats aren't reliable predictors of actual violence. Well, the FBI's guide, Workplace Violence Issues in Response, states that threats and threatening behavior are among the most reliable pre-incident indicators of potential violence. And I would agree with that. Looking at so many of these cases forensically and in our work and with our clients, that threats and threatening behavior are absolutely reliable indicators. Now, just because someone has made threats or has threatening behavior in the past doesn't mean they're going to become a violent actor, but it is an important component of that conversation. And if we're doing some sort of an assessment, most likely through a behavioral threat assessment team or other methods, we need to keep that in the forefront of looking at their past behavior. Do people change? Absolutely. Do they change for the better? Absolutely. Do they change for the worst? Absolutely. So we need to be sure that we are looking at that as well. Most workplace violence occurs in high crime areas. Wow, that's interesting, because when we think about crimes that occur in different types of neighborhoods and the demographics of neighborhoods, specifically when thinking of high crime areas, it doesn't necessarily translate into the workplace. So the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health published research showing that workplace violence incidents occur across a diverse geographic location or locations across the country. And I think that's very true because, again, look at some of the most heinous, most tragic incidents that have happened, let's say in the last 10 years. Now, there's those that you can see, wow, that was kind of a high crime area. And so I can see where maybe that would lean into that potential for workplace violence. But then we see other areas that are some of the most peaceful, loving places that still become victimized by violent crime. And so it is important to, again, always remember that crime can happen anywhere at any time. And so we want to do everything we can to mitigate those threats, as well as everything we can do to prevent and prepare for violent incidents. Here's the next one. Violent actors keep their plans well hidden and plan in isolation. I hear this one actually quite a bit, where individuals will say, yeah, it was such a surprise because no one knew. Are there cases where that has occurred? Absolutely. But the National Threat Assessment Center conducted a landmark study called Protecting America's Schools. You can find it as well in our library in this room, the squad room here. It found that approximately 94% of attackers communicated their intent to attack others before the incident. Now, in the field of threat assessment, we call this leakage. So as you can imagine, as the name implies, it's information leaking out. What does that information look like? Well, or how is it leaked out, I guess is probably the better question. Well, it can look in like many different forms. It can be everything from social media, very popular, to letters, to documents left around, drawings, things that are done on video surveillance, etc. It's that information that's leaking out. Now, here's really the big question on that. We're not going to dive into it today. We're going to talk about it more when we really dive into a threat assessment session. But the question out there being is, so why do they do this? And are they calling out for help by leaking information ahead of time? Are they sadistic and they think, I'm just going to tell everyone and see who believes and who doesn't believe I'm going to do this? But we'll dive into that further. But I want you to keep that in the back of your mind because we will be having that in a further conversation. Next myth: most workplace violence involves firearms. Well, again, go back to our friends in the TV world, the news world, right? Those are the stories that catch the news, but there are countless other incidents that are occurring out there where there is violent acts that don't involve firearms. So it's important that we don't label all of these cases as active shooter or firearms because that's not true. And also, it can really disrupt our planning process. So, as we are as a team organizing our plans for how best to protect our organization, or we're a CEO and we're thinking, how am I best going to protect my organization? If you are thinking only about an individual coming out or coming in, displaying a weapon, i.e., a firearm, and shooting people, it's good you're thinking about that, but if that's the only thing, we've got a problem because you need to be looking at the big picture of different things that can happen in the workplace, different ways these perpetrators carry out their harm on others. And I'll give you another comment here from the Bureau of Land Statistics. Survey of occupational injuries and illnesses, the majority of non-fatal workplace violence incidents involve actually hitting, kicking, beating, and other forms of physical assault. So again, when we think of a firearm incident, many times they do end in fatalities, not always. And we tend to kind of ignore these, we'll just call them lower level kind of cases that are the kickings, the beatings, other types of assaults. They're still relevant. We still need to look at ways to prevent them and prepare for them so that we can respond appropriately. You know, think of all the different things that could be used as a weapon that we don't talk about. And many times we don't plan for an attack using these devices in our organization. How about just simply a car? I mean, we've seen this throughout the world where, let's say, terrorist organizations have used cars with explosives. But we've also seen incidents where there were no explosives, where the car was used to smash into a building, to run people over. We've seen the use of knives. We've seen the use of countless other things from ropes to chains to, I mean, literally anything, almost anything could be converted into a weapon. So you're not going to be able to explore every one of those in your policies and your procedures and your planning, but to have big picture view beyond just firearms. Next myth: most workplace violence perpetrators just snap without warning. You know, I kind of look back introspectively at myself over the years, and long before I became involved in behavioral threat assessment, especially earlier on in my career, I think that was kind of this mindset I had because that was kind of the old school way of looking at things, that people just snap. Well, what we've found time and time again is for planned targeted violence or violent attacks, there is no snap. There is a buildup. Now, sometimes we are aware of these potential components that are leading them on this pathway to violence. Other times we don't know about it. And many times that is connected to a lack of reporting. I can't tell you how many cases I've looked at, I've researched, and we've seen as a whole on our national media over and over again where individuals don't report. They don't come forward. They knew about it, and we see it after the fact. I want to take you all the way back to Columbine. When kind of the modern age of targeted violence, and I don't want anyone to get confused and think that was the beginning. That was not the beginning. Long before that, there was targeted violence. But the reality is, in the more modern era, that's one that people focus on and is actually used by many perpetrators as kind of a study for them in the attacks that they're preparing. But what I do see there over and over again is individuals, just like in Columbine, after the fact on the news saying, I knew some of them was wrong. I knew there was a change in their behavior. I was very worried about how they were behaving, but they never said anything. Because what do they say? I can't imagine that this ever happened. I'm going to give you a quote here, or a report breakdown really quick. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit's research on workplace violence, published in their guide, Workplace Violence Issues and Response, states that just snapped theory is a dangerous myth. That's right on. That's exactly, it's a dangerous myth. It isn't just about just snapped. We need to, again, be conscious and aware of what's going on in our workplace. That's why we talk about reporting systems, receiving systems, and response systems, as I did in the first part of the show. We need to be sure that we are receiving and acting appropriately on that information, because in so many of these cases, people don't just snap. There is a pathway that they are following and a planning mechanism that they're using that many times, going back to one of the last myths, is fraught with leakage. It may be voluntary, it may be involuntary, but that's the stuff we need to pick up on. Workplace violence only affects certain industries. Wow, not true at all. The National Safety Council's Injury Facts publication presents data showing that while healthcare, retail, and service industries experience higher rates, it's across the board. And we talked a little bit about that earlier in the show as well. So it's important that we don't try to buttonhole our own selves by saying, hey, we're a preschool and we're in a very small community. We know every one of our parents, so nothing can happen here. Not true. Take a look at what's happened in the world. It is not necessarily contingent upon the size of your organization, the location, and most certainly not the type of organization you can have. Yes, there are those that have a higher likelihood of incidents occurring, but it's across the board. Violence prevention training creates unnecessary fear. You know, this one's kind of near and dear to my heart because I think when I first started in this business, I did a lot of training with people on active violence response, how to get out of those situations, how to best protect yourself, as well as best protect your coworkers, your clients, your customers, etc. There was certainly that very strong drive of let's scare them. You know, let's make it seem super realistic, because if we do that, then they'll know what it really feels like. Now, I'm not going to say that there isn't an argument for that side. And this is just the Bennett philosophy here. Take it for what you feel it's worth. But here's where I'm coming from. So many times when I go out and I work with organizations, and I always start with a conversation with the leadership and the safety teams and say, you know, what type of training do we want to do? Oh, we're doing run, hide, fight. My questions are, have you done it in the past? And what is an acceptable and accepted level of training here? And probably 50% of the time, maybe 45, 50% of the time, I get these responses from those teams saying, well, we did this once before. It didn't go over very well. And I can almost put the words in their mouth as I'm listening to them. They say, well, we made it very realistic. And now we have employees that won't go to training. They're fearful. They're scared. And then sometimes I hear too, where people say, hey, we've put together training in the past, made it realistic. We had everyone run out of the building during the evacuation. And unfortunately, someone tripped and they broke their leg. Well, when that happens, obviously, it just destroys the training. So here's my advice on this one. And I'm not going to cite a specific source on this. This is from someone, I guess you can say I have the expertise in it and I do it regularly, is be careful in your training to make sure it's acceptable and it's accepted by that organization. Certainly, if you're putting on the training, make sure you're prepared for it, or call Belanti.net, and we have trainers. You might even get me out there. That could be a blessing, or it could be just horrible. But nonetheless, happy to come out and work with your organization. End of commercial. But if you're trained and you're able to provide this training, make sure that you think in terms of, is this all about fear, or is it really giving people the information they need to know and how to react? And also, do we refresh it regularly? What I hear many times from organizations is, oh, yeah, we've done training on that 5 years ago. Okay, so what percentage of your employees are new since five? Oh, 30%. Okay, so 30% know nothing. And then the other 70%, you can tell I can do math, the other 70%, some kind of remember it, some don't. So make sure it's regularly refreshed. Training is perishable. You do need to keep it going. People who commit workplace violence are always obviously dangerous. Well, I think a lot of our commentary throughout this has kind of painted that picture that there aren't always obvious signs. Sometimes forensically, we see all these warning signs that occurred that were unobserved or no one reported. Again, going back to my whole comment about reporting, receiving, and responding to threats. That's a big one out there. But I'm going to give you an example here of one that kind of launched a lot of this, and it launched a phrase that has been there forever. And I think if you said it to just about anyone over the age of 13, they've probably heard it. 1986 in Edmond, Oklahoma, we had a postal worker. He had been reprimanded for the day before for some work performance. Came back the next day, he killed 14. Retrospectively, some concerning behaviors were found, but there was no obvious danger signs up until the event occurred. And what did this become coined as? Going postal. So feel free to look it up. You can see more information on this. But as you're training, as you're having those conversations, people always bring up going postal. Oh yeah, he went postal, right? Almost to the point where it's this slang that's almost like a joke to people, but it's not a joke. And in that particular case, there was no obvious danger signs. But 1986, now here we are in 2025. Our philosophies and our views on this have changed, because what we now say and what we now look for are all of those concerning behaviors that in the past we didn't even pay attention to. And so without fully assessing this case, and again, you can read it online. I think we'll probably do an assessment on it in a future show because it is very interesting. But as you can see, there was nothing for the time that was really noted as an obvious danger sign. Wow, this guy's going to come back tomorrow and kill many of us. That wasn't the case out there. So keep in mind, every situation is different, but we find time and time again that leakage that I talked about, the lack of reporting that's out there. There's so many factors that can hide the intended attack or divulge it, i.e. the leakage that's out there. So that's it for today on our myths. Please send us a message, send us an email through the squad room here. Let us know if you have some myths that you'd like us to tackle on our next show of Crushing Myths, because I'd love to tackle them. I love to look into them. And as always, and what I said in the first show was, there's always going to be naysayers. There's going to be those people that want to argue a counterpoint. We've tried to do our best to, as always, get the right sources out there, but it's mixed and vetted with our experience in Belanti.net. So as always, thank you for being a member of the Good Squad. Check out what all the other stuff we have in the squad room here, and we'll see you for our next show. And don't forget to ask that important question. Are we good?